everyone, and welcome to a session probably in the afternoon where at least I'm feeling very sleepy after those dinners, and it's here that we are, together to talk about responsible AI, and data governance usually is a very key component of doing AI responsibly. Another thing that I, as a data scientist, or maybe some ML practitioners, we feel is really hard is to understand how exactly data governance affects what we do in our daily lives. The technical metrics specifically around evaluation, around, let's say, delivering on project success, and how do we communicate that to business leaders. So today I'll talk a bit about this specific aspect of unraveling what happens when we talk a lot about data governance, how it affects our day-to-day projects and evaluation metrics. Now, a little disclaimer before I start is this probably may not be applicable to you if you're not using any customer data or user data, which is real user data. So you may save a lot of headache in that scenario. So before I dive into the details of those intricate threads, I would like to share a bit of the personal journey that I have had so far. So here is a graph of how much time I spent on basically making the project successful when I started out as a junior, which is on the left-hand side. And as I transitioned into more senior roles, and also from startups to enterprises, the amount of time that it took to actually deliver something useful that I was given as a task on the right. Now, when I entered the workforce, I was naive, innocent. My idea of success was, as I get more experienced, I would probably be faster in implementing the projects, right? But boy, was I wrong. So this particular increased timeline that you see here, that directly comes from the intricate dance that we do with the data preparation aspect of the training data, the evaluation data, and so on. So a lot of my friends here have already discussed a bit about the data regulatory aspects such as GDPR, also talked a bit about the principles on which these regulations are based on. So I probably will reiterate a bit of the same, but today in the interest of time, I'll be focusing on just the four of these, which is data accuracy, integrity and confidentiality, data usage consent, and cross-border data transfer. So we'll be just talking about these four, but feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk a bit about the other aspects as well. Now, this is a very simplistic view. I know a lot of you may not agree with the life cycle, the project life cycle I have here, but don't worry, I'm not going into those details. This is just for a reference to understand the whole life cycle of an AI or an ML project. So we go through scoping of a problem, acquisition of the data, exploration, modeling of the models, evaluation, deployment, and then monitoring, and then this cycle repeats again. Any ML or AI project success essentially depends on three aspects, which is alignment of the business and technical metrics, how the model is actually performing on those technical metrics, and what is the evaluation data quality for reporting those technical metrics. So these are the three key essential aspects of any ML or AI projects, at least in the businesses that we will talk about today. So in this life cycle, the most important aspect when it comes to evaluation is this specific aspect of data acquisition and data exploration, because this gives us the training data and also the evaluation data that ends up being our guide to report on any sort of project success throughout the project life cycle. But now the question is, how easy it is to get this particular evaluation data set that is stable enough and is also a good indicator of the data that we probably will be getting in the production once it is deployed. So this probably is sometimes, I would say, not that achievable, especially in a highly regulated environment. So what are the factors that probably we can take care of and proceed from this point? Another important aspect is, because this is such an initial phase in the whole life cycle, that this particular aspect creates ripples throughout the process. So if you don't get this right, this probably will affect your whole project, and a lot of issues may kind of crop up in later stages. So let's dive a little deeper into what exactly is the impact of data regulations. So I'll talk about these 4 principles. So let's talk a bit about data accuracy. What does this mean? So data accuracy essentially points towards that as a business or an enterprise, whatever data you hold on your users or customers should be accurate and should be up to date. Now, it is not necessary that the users should reach out to you for the updation of the data. It could be that you are responsible to make sure to reach out or take whatever steps are necessary to keep it up to date. So that is first aspect. But how does it affect your evaluation data? Now, one of the key best practices in preparing any sort of evaluation data or training data set is it should be the data distribution of this evaluation data should be very similar to what you would have in the production. So sometimes we end up using real customers' data or users' data in this evaluation data set to actually ensure that whatever models we are developing, it actually has the generalization that we need it to have. But let's say you have this user's data that you have in the evaluation data set, and that gets updated. So what is the impact? Now, you might guess that this may create, it is not necessarily so, but this may create some sort of data drift in your evaluation data. Now imagine you have delivered a project and it has been 6 months, you haven't changed anything, but suddenly the data gets updated and your evaluation metric also gets updated, and that declines. So it is probably nothing to do with what you have worked so far, but you have to be conscious that it may happen. Second one is integrity and confidentiality. So this one, this particular principle says that whatever data you hold on your users or your customers, you should basically make sure that the data is not authorized for any sort of use that may pose any external or internal risk to that particular individual, or even any customer that may be impacted from it. So how does this impact your evaluation data? Now, this essentially affects the data acquisition bit, because a lot of times, a lot of ML practitioners, I'm sure a lot of you may have experienced that you will have a lot of concerns getting the required data access to actually build the models that you want to build. So this is where you probably will not be able to access certain data piece, and that will create biased samples of data that you will probably evaluate your ML models on. So this again is a crucial aspect to be aware of how this will impact your models. And because you don't have access to the right data set, your models may not perform as well. And this is probably something I'm assuming that you would already understand why. So moving on to the data usage consent. So again, this is quite similar to the data accuracy bit, where this specific principle, so how the data regulations affect is, you should have explicit consent from the users to be able to use their data in any sort of processing or any sort of model development that you do. Now, again, if let's say you're using a customer's data for evaluation data set, and suddenly the user churns, and you have a lot of samples from that particular user's data, this will again create the similar problem of data drift and also change in the performance metrics as we saw in the data accuracy case. The fourth one is cross-border data transfer, and this is one of the key ones because it is very, very relevant in the recent times where we have flexible working policies, remote working policies, work from anywhere policies, distributed data teams, where we basically say that, okay, it doesn't matter what is the location of your team, but not necessarily. So a lot of regulations are based on how, so when you transfer any data from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, there are certain rules that needs to be followed, specifically when you are transferring any sort of personal data. So you have to be very careful about if you're working in the Europe region. So for example, there is a recent alignment on how the data can be transferred from UK to US, which is called US-UK data bridge. I think they already had this for EU-US, but they have recently started it for the UK-US data transfer as well. But a lot of jurisdictions are not even considered when you talk about the data transfer. So for example, certain countries don't really have good enough laws to protect that personal data, and thus the enterprises don't take the risk of that particular data transfer to that region. So how does this affect? So again, it is again similar to the integrity and confidentiality, which basically means that if you are working in a location where you don't have access to the user's data of certain demographics, that will again create bias data for your evaluation data set. And similarly, the model performance degradation on production. So we have talked about the challenges, but how can we solve these challenges? Or can we actually solve these challenges? So I think these are two different questions, and I will try and answer how can we probably take a systems approach to be able to solve this. But it is also crucial to understand that it may be necessary for you to kind of come up with a trade-off where you might not be able to solve everything, but maybe the best possible solution. So this is the framework that I created after trying to think about this specific problem from a holistic perspective. And I brought together organizational, operational, and technical aspects to be able to solve this. So let's start with discussing organizational aspects. So the first key thing that is very important here is the awareness and education. And this is not just for internal employees or ML practitioners. This is across all the stakeholders that are involved. So, for example, you have customers. Customers should be aware of how their data is being used, but they should also be educated on what it means for them if they do not give the required permissions for us to use the data. So, for example, it may help for them to know that, okay, if you're not using their data, it may mean that they have certain biased models, which is not really relevant to their use cases. And this is something that is also to be discussed in the customer agreements, for example. So, for example, who owns the data, who is liable for what kind of data, and there are so many nuances that needs to be discussed with customers during the specific process, which actually happens. It's just that we as ML practitioners, we are so away from that particular discussions that we are not really aware of what's happening there, and that creates a lot of frustration. Business leaders, again, they must be also aware and educated around how these aspects may affect the product features, the models that are powering those product features, and so on. And ML practitioners, we need to also be aware of what are the challenges. Sometimes we are at crossroads with legal teams. We basically say that, okay, we can't get anything done. It takes too long to wait. Basically, there's a long wait to do anything in the company. But we have to realize that everyone is doing their job. it's good to have a point of view where you can discuss these aspects with the teams and try and work in a cross-dimensional skill set to understand like how can we actually solve those problems. So awareness and education is obviously the key to begin with. Second is team structure. Now, as I mentioned earlier, like we are moving towards a lot of distributed data teams, a lot of flexible working policies, but we have to be very careful when we have certain regulatory aspects to think about, and it is important to have the right roles and responsibilities described, the right ways of working, so that we actually get the whole work done rather than basically fall into some traps where we can have legal issues further down the line. Operational aspects, so we have data acquisition. I think the first thing that we always think about is what are the alternate solution to customer data. We can have third-party vendors, synthetic data generation, and again, data anonymization. So these are aspects where we can probably think about how we can basically not use customers' data and avoid all these possible implications. But again, sometimes it's not really possible to do that. With data anonymization, again, there are a lot of nuances here as well. So who owns that anonymized data? These are all the discussions that we, again, need to be discussing with the customers. Second aspect is data governance. So it is very important to have the automated data compliance pipeline so that your evaluation data or the training data gets updated with whatever the source data is. And if the deletion has to take place, it should basically be automatic. That basically brings me to another very important aspect, which is compliant data version control. Now, a lot of MLOps best practices talk about having data version control in place so that you can actually access the data that, that maybe a previous version of data that you have trained your model on. The problem with that is that if the data has to be deleted and it is present in your data version control, it's a problem. So this also needs to be highlighted, that you have to be very careful when you are using any sort of data version control tools. The last in this section is the MLOps. I think we all agree on continuous monitoring, continual evaluation, and the documentation aspects that are key to ensure that all of this works in the tandem that it needs to. The technical aspects, model retraining. So it would be a good, so if your model is actually dependent on a lot of customer data and it is, you believe that it is fiddly, it is good to have some sort of alignment schedule of the retraining with, so basically aligning the model retraining schedule with the customer deletion data schedule. So for example, if it is 30 days, maybe consider something around those timelines. And also maintenance of consistent data splits. So what this means is that if you're working on a split of, let's say, 60, 20, 20 percentage points, try to maintain that split, because when businesses talk or business leaders talk about anything, they prefer to talk in percentages. So it will help to have the same percentage throughout your product cycles. And then last but not the least, consider customer-specific models. Although this brings a lot of headache in maintaining a lot of customer-specific models, but maybe it becomes necessary in some cases. So maybe consider using transfer learning, fine-tuning the base model on certain customer-specific data, and so on. So these are just some of the aspects that I have touched about on the 4 principles that I talked about. And that probably would be all that I bore you with today. So any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Okay, you can sit. Thank you for your talk. So we have a question here. So how do you think, if you think that data regulation is or will impact the AI performance and scientific evolution, and what do you think is the optimal trade-off between regulation and scientific evolution?
That's a very good question. And I would probably say that I do not have a definite answer to this because it depends a lot on your own constraints and variables that you're working on. In some cases, it may be really easy to find some trade-offs. In some cases, it may not be possible. And that's where you probably have to communicate that to the right stakeholders. So I wish I had a very definite answer to this question. But yeah, that's what I think of it.
And do you think that the new European data spaces regulation will be able to address some of these points, some of these tension points you mentioned?
So, address, I'm not sure, impact definitely, right? Because the EU AI Act is more towards the models rather than the data part, although obviously the models will impact the data part as well. But I do definitely see a lot of impact happening and a lot of things changing in the future to how we do it. So, for example, the EU AI Act focuses a lot on the high-risk, data, which essentially will be impacting a lot of things that we talked about today.
Yes. Well, I was talking about the data spaces. So these data spaces in which critical domain data can be securely shared.
Yeah.
Well, it's still a vision, maybe.
Yes.
But it would be helpful for sure. So we have here another question regarding if you think that who should be responsible for data compliance. If the data owners are responsible or the data team consuming the data?
That's a very good question. And I somehow believe that it is everyone in that particular life cycle. So in our organization, we have a very good initiative, which is called Privacy Champions, which essentially means that anyone in the team throughout the whole life cycle, any skill set, they can be the privacy champions of the customers, advocating for the best practices or basically making decisions that help making data privacy as good as possible for the customers. So I believe that it's each and every one of us, and that is the reason I talk about awareness and education a lot.
Okay, thank you. Final question here. So, regarding your experience talking to lawyers and these, translation issues, regarding so, what is the best way to explain what you are trying to achieve with data when you are speaking to a lawyer?
Okay. I know some of my legal friends might look at this the recording, but I probably will say that don't undermine what they can understand. They are experts. They are very good at understanding at least the basics of what we are trying to explain to them. And I believe the most important part is to kind of come from a point of empathy for them. To understand that what they are doing is just helping the organizations to, not really make mistakes that may cause millions of dollars, because they are breaking some law. So it's imperative that you start with maybe a basic structure, and then they will follow up on, the questions that they have. And it also helps that you start this conversation, because then you will realize the questions that they have, and then document that in a certain way. So the more people you kind of, interact with, you will realize that how you want to explain those things in a simple way so that, it can be clearly understood by everyone involved.